Hi there. Tonight, you ease into a quiet corner of the past. Dim the room to a candle's hush, let the soft hum of your fan smooth the edges of your thoughts, and settle in. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Curiosity loves company. Now walk with me. You're 12, and the road is longer than your name. Your shoes are thin, your future thinner. The year is 1835, Eastern France, and you carry everything that matters inside your ribs because there's nothing left to carry in your hands. Your mother is gone, your home is an echo, and the world, well, the world is a long stony ribbon pointing to Paris. You put one foot in front of the other. Mud takes your ankles. Wind takes your warmth. Hope takes the lead. Breakfast is bread that forgot it was bread. You chew until it obeys. The air smells like wet bark, cart grease, and the cold iron taste of rain that never quite falls. A wagon rumble passes and dust salts your tongue. You keep going. You sleep in barns when they say yes and under hedges when they say nothing. Your pillow is your coat. Your blanket is your breath. By day, you trail the river like a quiet dog, practicing a skill no one taught you, noticing. You notice how heavy things tire hands before they tire eyes. You notice how a lid that sticks becomes a curse, how a suitcase that splits becomes a confession of carelessness. You don't have words for it yet, but you feel the puzzle of movement tugging at you. Travel is a problem, you itch to solve it. Paris arrives slowly, the way a fever does. The roads harden, the smells sharpen. Coal smoke, tannery bite, steam, horse, onion soup, and the coppery halo of factory air. You step into a city that feels like a chest that never quite exhales. You're hungry, small and invisible. Perfect conditions to learn. You find work where hard work speaks louder than your name, as an apprentice, packer and trunk maker. The shop is narrow and honest. Wood shavings curl at your feet like sleeping fish. Glue simmers sweet and sour on a small stove. Linen stretches taut over frames with a sound like a held breath. Fingers here are nicked, blackened, and trusted. You love it instantly. You sweep first, then you carry, then you watch the master's hands. He is precise as a clock's backbone. He taps nails in with the humility of a prayer. You learn the grain of poplar by touch alone. You can tell when a board will accept a nail by the whisper it makes under your thumb. You learn that travel eats weak corners for breakfast. You learn that lids must kiss frames, not wrestle them. You learn that a thing made for roads must be stronger than roads. You eat cheap soup in a bowl that wobbles, and you memorize the rhythm of the street outside. Clop, clop, shout, clatter, laugh, curse, cough, and always the heartbeat thud of someone in a hurry. By night, you practice. You recover scraps in linen, stretch canvas until your arms hum, sand edges until they go from mean to kind. You sleep, with splinters in your palms and a blueprint in your head. Clients begin as shadows beyond the counter. A chambermaid with eyes that count minutes. A footman who stands like a fence post. A lady's maid with a spine made of appointments. They trust the shop because their employers trust no delays. You listen. The stories in their orders tell you everything. Wardrobes that shift with seasons. Jewellery that travels under silence. Gowns that fold once and never crease again. Every request is a confession of worry. Will this survive the road? Your answer becomes craft. Then, one day, you meet the road in silk. A countess's household needs a packer who can protect gowns from the city's teeth. You stand in a room that smells like violet starch and the wax of well-polished wood. You fold fabric so it remembers the body without wrinkling its memory. You cushion bodices like they're breathing. You learn more in a week than the street taught you in a month. That status travels, and it hates being jostled. Now the idea arrives, the one that feels like a quiet door you've been walking beside for years. Trunks are heavy and domed, built like hills and about as stackable. The world is moving faster, railways bloom like veins across maps, and luggage is still acting like it belongs on a carriage roof under a nervous sky. What if it didn't have to? What if trunks could be flat, honest, stackable, made to move with trains instead of fight them? You build in your head first, a flat-topped trunk that promises order. Canvas, not leather, to shed weight without shedding dignity. Strong, yes, but obedient to space. The lid meets the base with a crisp certainty. The corners don't ask for mercy. The inside doesn't just hold, it arranges. A trunk that says, "I know where everything goes," and then proves it. You stay late, the workshop dim and fragrant, and start on a prototype. The hammer is a metronome, the nails are notes. The wood is stubborn until it isn't. You wrestle the lid until it obeys, sand the seam until light can't find the join, stretch the canvas taut as a promise. The first time it closes cleanly, you stand there, hand on the lid, and feel a new road open under your feet. Morning finds you with sawdust in your hair and certainty in your chest. The master examines the piece, says little, but the corner of his mouth moves the way approval moves when it's shy. You put the trunk up front. It sits there like an answer that hasn't been questioned yet. People notice. Not everyone. Just the ones who move. A courier traces the edge with a knuckle. A lady's maid tests the lid twice and smiles on the second try. A railway clerk asks a price and doesn't wince. The road is shifting and you can hear the gravel roll. You're still young, still quiet, still more splinter than polish, but you have felt your hands say something the city understands. I will make travel behave. And you know this is only the beginning. Because if a trunk can stack, a life can too, on top of nothing but effort, one flat certainty at a time. You wake to a city that learned to sprint overnight. Steam shrieks, couplings slam, and trains breathe out crowds like brass-bellied beasts. Schedules are no longer suggestions, they're commandments. That changes everything. Luggage that once clung to carriage roofs must now behave inside luggage cars built like filing cabinets. Your flat-topped idea is not a luxury. It's an apology from the past to the present. You refine. Joints tighten. Hinges align with a neatness that borders on stubbornness. You learn to treat weight like a debt. You pay it down where you can. Canvas becomes your ally. Lighter than leather, easier to clean, eager to take colour and pattern. You fit frames so the trunk doesn't flinch when lifted by one handle, because people always lift by one handle. You reinforce corners because corners tell the truth about stress. Word circulates the way influence always does, through mouths that matter. A valet to a duke praises how cases stack. A modiste's assistant announces a gown arrived as if it had never travelled. The city nods. You open your own workshop. Your sign is modest, your ambition isn't. You promise carefulness, and then you deliver it. Inside, the museum of your mind becomes a factory of your hands. Layouts evolve. Compartments for shoes that dislike being crushed. Trays that lift without complaint. Hat boxes that hold shape like polite secrets. The smell is a loyal chorus. Glue, canvas, wood, oil, graphite. You run your fingers over every seam as if reading Braille, and the message says, consistent, consistent, consistent. Rivals circle like gulls, loud and opportunistic. They copy shapes and miss the point. They see a flat top and think that's the trick. It isn't. The trick is discipline. The lid must close like a sentence ending with a period, not a question mark. The interior must make choices for people too hurried to make them. You do not build boxes, you build routines. Soon the house you serve is not a house at all, but a name. Empress Eugénie, the most watched dresser in France. You become her packer, gowns that glow like water, hats that could sulk if creased, fabrics that carry their own tempers. You earn trust at the speed of caution, slowly, then all at once. When royal carriages move, your trunks follow like calm punctuation. The era crowns you gently. Paris thrums beneath houseman's blade. Boulevards open like lungs, light floods new facades, workshops multiply, and style learns to stride in daylight. You align your brand with order, modernity, clarity, no flamboyance, clean lines, a quiet confidence that whispers, we travel well. You design a trunk for everything that moves with a person who refuses to be inconvenienced. A bed trunk for those who carry a bed because hotels pretend. A wardrobe trunk where dresses dangle without wrinkling into resentment. A writing desk, folded into a box that gives letters a home before they become history. Every piece is an answer to a sigh you heard in a waiting room. The first time you see a stack of your trunk slide into a rail car like a set of respectful books, you feel a bone-deep click. This is what you came to the road for. Not to decorate movement, but to civilize it. You're no longer just solving problems, you're reducing friction. And in a world that worships speed, friction is sin, but speed invites thieves. The century learns to pick locks the way a river learns to find cracks in a dam, relentlessly. You hear stories, jewels misplaced by strangers' hands, letters opened by eyes that didn't earn them. The old locks fail in modern light, so you start over on security not with paranoia but with engineering. You develop a lock that knows its owner, a tumbler mechanism with a signature code recorded in your books. 2 keys, 1 mind behind them. No more skeleton keys that open everything and protect nothing. You do not sell the feeling of safety. You sell the math of it. Customers leave with codes, and you keep a ledger organised like a monastery's library. You respect privacy so fiercely it becomes part of your reputation. Patterns arrive, not as decoration first, but as identification. Your canvas learns its first uniform, a subtle motif that says, "This belongs to the house that believes in order." Later, when imitators flock, you will answer with names printed in letters that pretend they're not shouting. But for now, you prefer restraint. The work speaks softly and strangers lean in to hear. Inside the workshop, you mentor hands that remind you of your own. Young, alert, hungry for the respect good craft gives. You teach them to sand long, not small, to cut once because they measured twice, to think of the owner's itinerary while fitting a tray. Your shop becomes a school where the tuition is patience and the diploma is a lid that sits perfectly flush in August and February alike. You weigh every decision against a simple question. Will this behave on the road? If the answer is anything but yes, it goes back to the bench. The bench never lies. It has listened to 1,000 excuses and accepted none. You love it for that. One evening, as the sun slides down the boulevard and the smell of roasting chestnuts sneaks in through the door, you run your fingertips across a finished wardrobe trunk. The canvas is smooth and honest. The lock is a small, exact promise. Inside, drawers breathe in and out without complaint. You close it, and the click lands in the room like a verdict. Good. You started as a boy with nothing but distance. Now distance is your discipline. Trains shriek, ships groan, and roads keep lying about being smooth. You keep answering them with rectangles that say no, we will be smooth instead. War rolls in like a storm that thinks it invented thunder. 1870, and Paris holds its breath until it coughs. The city that taught you. Craft now teaches you scarcity. Shells argue with rooftops, shops shutter, bread lines lengthen. The workshop lights dim to a stubborn glow. You ration glue as if it were perfume. You starve your doubts first. The siege squeezes. Hunger is not a metaphor, it's a schedule. Horses vanish from streets, then rats from corners. Heat becomes a rumour. Still, your benches stand. You salvage canvas, repurpose frames, and repair what you would have replaced. Clients who can flee do, and they take your trunks because they trust them when they don't trust anything else. When the gun's quiet, you sweep up the city's dust and start again. People emerge thinner and more certain about what matters. They have fewer things and stronger opinions about keeping them. You answer with trunks that compromise nowhere. Cleaner seams, smarter interiors, locks that respect secrets as if secrets were fragile glass. You think about counterfeits not as insults but as weather. They come because you matter. They force you to codify quality in ways thieves can't steal. You respond with monogrammed canvas, a pattern that is your signature made into rhythm. Letters interlock like gears. The background hums with a motif that looks decorative until someone tries to copy it and discovers the patience inside. You move the shop to a boulevard address that announces calm ambition. Windows become a stage. Trunks sit inside like quiet sculptures of purpose. People pause outside, faces tilted, hands tucked behind their backs. They don't look at price first. They look at order. You sell relief in a world that constantly tosses clothes like cards. Your son grows into a partner, his curiosity aligned with your caution. He speaks fluent travel, steamer, sleeper, passage, porter, and he loves the map the way you love the bench. Together you push. Steamer trunks slim down to suit cramped cabins. Wardrobes gain better lungs. Drawers that glide as if lubricated by the idea of punctuality. You refine lock codes, sharpen corners, and smooth handles so palms finish a journey unblistered. The world changes its vehicles without changing its habits. Ships still shudder, trains still sprint, roads still lie. People still pack too much and pretend they won't. Your house becomes a quiet contract. Overpack all you want. We will keep your chaos behaving. Materials evolve at your elbow. Linen canvas composites gain tougher skins. Metal hardware learns to be exacting without becoming arrogant. You flirt with colour not as fashion but as navigation. A trunk you can spot on a dock from a muttering distance. Visibility is security's cousin. Letters arrive from far places creased and grateful. A duchess thanks you for a wedding veil arriving unwrinkled after a sea that refused to sit still. A writer blesses the inbuilt desk that turned cabin noise into paragraphs. A chef praises the food trunk that kept knives as sharp as his temper. You pin these notes to the wall not as trophies, but as measurements. Satisfaction is a ruler. You lay it across every new design. And then, quietly, your name becomes a shorthand for certainty. Not just among the titled and the titled adjacent, but among professionals who simply need a thing to work every time. You find that consistency is a better advertisement than any flourish. You do not chase the eye, you reassure it. Paris keeps teaching you that fashion is how time looks when it likes what it sees, and style is how utility wears a tie. You keep teaching Paris that elegance is just efficiency that learned manners. You design because the road still has bad habits, and you're not done correcting them. At the day's end, you lock the ledger where each lock code sleeps. You cover the bench like a goodnight to a friend who kept your secrets. You turn the sign in the window and watch the boulevard's lamps lace gold into the dusk. Somewhere, a train calls to a distance it will devour before morning. Somewhere else, a porter lifts a trunk and doesn't grunt. You smile at that. It means the weight is where it should be, in the structure, not the struggle. You started with a walk to Paris that blistered your feet and calloused your resolve. You end this chapter with a house that turned movement into manners. Tomorrow will demand more. It always does. But tonight, you let the city breathe, and you breathe with it. You stand in the workshop at dawn, palms on a curve that refuses to behave. A domed lid rocks under your touch like a boat in shallow water. That's the problem. Travel has changed, but luggage still thinks it rides carriage roofs under a fussy sky. Trains demand geometry. Schedules demand obedience. You draw a rectangle. Flat top, flat bottom, true sides, almost indecent in its simplicity. You pare away weight the way a careful cook trims fat. Not too much. Never where strength lives. Poplar ribs, straight as a ruler. Canvas, coated and disciplined, stretched until it hums. Hinges aligned so neatly you can hear their agreement when they shut. You lift the lid and close it again. No wobble, no apology. Just a clean meeting of edges, like a handshake you can trust. On the platform, you test it where it matters. Porters frown first. New things waste time, and then they stack 2, then 3, then a column that stands without drama. No sliding, no sighing. The baggage car looks different instantly, less like a barn of impatient animals, more like a tidy shelf. A conductor glances, nods once, and shouts a minute earlier than usual. That minute is your victory hidden in plain sight. Inside, the order continues. You refuse to build a void and call it luxury. Order is the gift. You lay out trays that lift quietly, runners that don't swell into stubbornness when weather sulks. Straps, leathered and firm, hold hats as if they remember their shape even when no one's looking. A narrow drawer keeps gloves from turning into wandering socks. A small case slides out for jewellery, its lining as soft as discretion. You make a place for boots that doesn't bully gowns. You make compartments that teach their owners to breathe. You learn the physics of mishandling, because mishandling is the only constant. Someone will lift by one handle, someone will drop a corner on a station's unfriendly stone, someone will sit on a lid they shouldn't. So you reinforce stress points until they shrug off carelessness without complaint. Corner pieces in brass take the bruises. The frame carries the load, not the skin. Balance becomes a quiet religion. The first client to take the new trunk comes back without complaint, which is the rarest compliment. The second brings a friend who travels for a living and looks at luggage the way a chef looks at knives. He runs a knuckle along the seam. He opens and closes the lid twice. He smiles only with his eyes. "It behaves," he says. "That's all you wanted." You watch the city adjust to the idea. A porter ties ropes faster. A maid unpacks without sighs. A clerk in a station office redraws a diagram because rectangles mean he can. The change is small enough to fit through a doorway. large enough to shift a habit. Your rectangle becomes an argument that wins by being obvious. A competitor attempts a copy and misses the point. He flattens the lid but leaves the frame lazy. The corners carry nothing. The hinges beg for forgiveness. The interior is a bucket with aspirations. Owners notice after the second journey. That's fine. You don't court first impressions, you invest in second ones. Night returns you to the bench. You sand a seam until light can't find a reason to pass. You file a hinge until it doesn't remember how to squeak. You tap nails in with the patience of a watchmaker, counting seconds on a quiet afternoon. The room smells of glue, starch, and wood warmed by effort. You close the lid one last time, seeking the sound you've been chasing all week. A click, so even it sounds like punctuation. There. Full stop. A flat face invites a signature. Not vanity, clarity. On docks and platforms, confusion is theft's favourite cousin. You begin with restraint. A coated canvas that cleans easily, holds colour without shouting, ages with a polite memory. Then the imitators arrive, loud and loose. You answer with pattern as identity. Geometry takes the lead, interlocking motifs that dance just enough to be recognised at 20 paces, quiet enough to belong in a first-class cabin. It isn't ornament for ornament's sake. It's a flag that doesn't need wind. A porter points from a distance and knows where your work belongs. A client on a crowded quay picks their case out of a crowd, the way a mother picks her child out of a schoolyard. Hardware learns discipline too. Corners wear brass not as jewellery but as armour. Edge protectors curve where they must, square where they should, taking scrapes like seasoned diplomats, absorbing insult without escalation. Handles lie flat until they're asked to work. When they rise, they fit the hand as if the hand was the blueprint. Screws sit flush. Rivets stay where they're put. Nothing rattles, because rattling is the sound of a broken promise. Security becomes smart instead of stern. You refine the lock. Combinations recorded in your ledger with the neatness of a choir book. 2 keys, 1 code, a quiet ritual at delivery. The owner writes it down, you write it down. The mechanism remembers it better than either of you. No grand ironwork, no threat. Just certainty hidden behind a face that doesn't boast. Odd requests arrive, and you welcome them like new verbs in a language you already love. A tea case for early trains, cups nested in velvet hollows, saucers stacked in cushioned towers, a kettle cradled in straps that hum agreement during rough track. A photographer begs you to shield glass negatives from a ship that never met a calm day it liked. You invent gentle springs inside wooden trays before anyone names them. A musician asks for a case that holds a violin safe from cold, heat, elbows, and impatience. You do it, and the first time he opens the lid in a foreign city, the instrument sings as if it never moved. The workshop becomes a quiet laboratory. You test finishes against steam and salt. You leave a prototype in a damp corner for a week, and then ask it if it still believes in right angles. You hang weight from a handle and let time argue. When time loses, you allow yourself half a smile. You keep notes because progress is just memory with good handwriting. The window on the boulevard turns into a stage for calm ideas. Passers-by slow down without meaning to. They notice the way the canvas holds light. They notice the proportions that avoid both fuss and boredom. They walk in, expecting to buy a box. They leave with order. You design the most courteous rebuke to wrinkles the century has seen. The wardrobe trunk. It stands there, narrow and tall, a closet that learned to travel without drama. On one side, hangers perch on a rail, ready to keep gowns from learning bad habits. On the other, drawers align in a patient column, each one shallow enough to prevent rummaging, deep enough to earn respect. A small mirror waits behind a panel, because vanity is not a sin when schedules are strict. You pivot the trunk open in the showroom for a client who has been hurt by hotels too many times. Fabric breathes, nothing spills. A silk bodice that used to arrive sullen now steps out unwrinkled, as if the journey was a rumour it chose not to believe. The client touches a seam the way you'd touch a sleeping bird. Finally, she says, and the room exhales with her. Ships approve, cabins mean with space and impatient with chaos, welcome rectangles that mind their manners. The wardrobe trunk tethers to a wall or sits against it, steady as a lectern. On trains, porters learn the trick of tilting and rolling, so that weight becomes an ally instead of an accusation. In hotels, bellboys grin because tips follow ease. You scale the idea without thinning it. A smaller trunk for short passages that still insists on dignity. A hat case that defends architecture disguised as fashion. A writing case that opens to a desk when the world insists you work while moving. You even build a bed that folds into travel, because some people rest better near their own wood and linen, and you see no reason to deny them. The pattern on the canvas, once a whisper, becomes a language. Not loud, never loud, but fluent enough that strangers understand. This piece keeps its promises. Counterfeits appear and tire themselves on details they don't respect. They mimic the surface and miss the soul. Their lids ask to be forced. Their corners bruise early. Their interiors don't understand that time is precious. Your work, by contrast, ages with the kind of grace that makes patina look like a compliment. You keep teaching your team the same sermon, delivered with different examples. Measure twice, cut once, and then check the weather. Sand long, not hard. Feel with fingertips what eyes can't confirm. Build for the road you don't control. If a drawer sticks in August, fix it in February until it doesn't. If a handle bites, it is wrong even if it is beautiful. If a lock hesitates, start over. One evening, you stand in the doorway and watch a porter wheel a wardrobe trunk across the threshold for a late customer. The wheels hum, the canvas keeps its counsel, the handle lies flat again when it's done. The customer tips his hat, then you, and then the night takes them both. You close up, wipe the bench with a cloth that knows the shape of your hand, and think a simple thought that feels like a destination. Travel can be kind. You learn fast that movement attracts hands that don't belong to you. Platforms crowd. Porters change. Baggage rooms blur into one long corridor of keys that fit too many things. That's the splinter under your nail. Universality masquerading as convenience. One key for many trunks means one mistake for many losses. You decide that trust needs engineering, not optimism. You clear the bench. Brass plates, files, a Tumblr sketch smudged with glue thumbprints. You don't chase complexity for its own sake. You chase inevitability. The mechanism must do what honesty does. Work quietly every time for the right person and no one else. You sketch a numbered heart inside a modest face. A lock with a memory. You won't print its pride on the lid. You'll hide it behind precision. Metal answers to patience. Teeth align only when you introduce them like dignitaries, slowly, with context. You file, test, file again. Springs learn temper, pins learn discretion. You shut your eyes and listen to the click. Good clicks sound firm, not loud. A bad lock shouts. A good one concludes. Your first client for the new mechanism isn't a duchess. It's a lady's maid with a reputation for never losing anything. She looks at the plate, unimpressed by shine, and asks what matters. If someone tries, you invite her to try. She twists, she jimmies, she fails, and the trunk sits there unruffled. You hand her the key and whisper a number for the ledger. The lid opens with the satisfaction of a door closing on doubt somewhere else. You standardize the ritual. Every lock receives a code. Every code receives a line in a book ruled so clean it could slice in precision. Owners take one key, you keep a twin in quiet custody. If life happens, lost bag, lost boat, lost key, the ledger remembers. No duplicate without proof, no proof without person. You sell relief as a service, and you back it with ink. Soon word travels by the channels that count. Not salons, but staff corridors. The people who carry secrets prefer those who protect them. You become the place where valuables rest without flinching. The shop's front window stays modest, but your back room, where codes sleep and brass earns its dignity, becomes the city's most dependable whisper. Testing moves from theory to theatre. You stage a demonstration because some truths need witnesses. A trunk sits on the counter, locked. A valet tries a ring of illicit skeleton keys that once opened half the city's luggage. They sulk in his hand, useless. A porter applies the art of impatience. A shake, a twist, a hopeful pry. Nothing. A jeweller, sceptical by profession, presses near to the plate as if metal will confess under pressure. It doesn't. Then the owner steps forward, inserts the small promise of metal, and the mechanism greets familiarity the way a trained hound greets a bootstep. The lid lifts. No drama. The room exhales. That's your favourite applause, the kind that sounds like relief. Someone mutters, "Finally," and you realise you've just replaced superstition with procedure. Thieves adapt. They always do. You adapt faster, but not louder. You refine tolerances until even clever tools can't find a purchase. Screws sit flush. Plates resist corrosion. Springs keep their temper through damp winters and hot decks. You soak a lock in salt air, then smoke, then rainwater that pretends it's clean and isn't. It still answers to its owner alone. You ice one in the courtyard in January, warm it by the stove, and it doesn't sulk or stick. Fidelity shouldn't be seasonal. Logistics become part of the promise. A customer writes from a port city after a frantic morning. Key misplaced, ship departing, valuables inside. The note is tight with panic. You check the ledger, confirm identity through quiet channels, dispatch a service key with a rider who moves like news. The trunk opens before the gangway lifts. That's not luck. That's a system. Competitors respond with ornament. Bigger plates, Gothic flourishes, aggressive shapes that pretend to terrify villains. You reply with restraint. Your security is felt, not flaunted. Owners learn the small, consistent ritual. Key, number, click. The confidence compounds. People stop hovering over luggage in hotels. They eat dinner without glancing back at every tinkle of cutlery. You didn't invent calm, but you packaged it. Trust becomes architecture. You integrate the lock into the frame, not as an afterthought, but as a cornerstone. Hardware, wood, canvas. Each piece learns to carry its share of security. A trunk shouldn't be a wall with a weak door. Everything should conspire against intrusion. You design a lip that foils the blade, a seam that denies leverage, a plate that refuses conversation with magnets and myths. The ledger grows into a quiet cathedral of numbers. You treat it like a living pact. Clerks learn your penmanship and your caution. Every retrieval requires 2 confirmations. Every code change rests on a documented reason. When a fire insurance man visits to measure your prudence, he leaves nodding as if he's just weighed gold. He has, just not the clinking kind. Stories return to you like homing pigeons. A diplomat's case crosses borders under suspicious eyes and arrives with seals intact and letters unopened. A performer's costume trunk survives a week of backstage chaos without losing a single jewel. A widow travels with a locket that holds a life's breath. She writes to say thank you for protecting something that doesn't look expensive but is. You pin these notes beside drafts and die samples. They remind apprentices that craft isn't measured only in corners, it's measured in promises kept for people you'll never meet. You iterate again. Smaller travel requires smaller certainties. Overnight cases receive versions of the lock scaled down, never dumbed down. Writing boxes, hat trunks, the new compact models for motorcars, all carry the same private click. The sound becomes your signature. People begin to recognise it the way they recognise a friend's knock at the door. And then there's the moment you don't advertise. A trunk recovered from a derailment, battered but unbreached. The owner arrives, pale, expecting loss. You place the key in their hand. The click lands like a pulse returning. The lid opens to order, clothing unruffled, documents in place, a ring still where it waited, no flourish. Just the quiet satisfaction of a promise proven in hard light. Security, you realise, is not a feature, it's a relationship. You don't merely sell trunks. You lend your caution to people who have better things to think about than locks. You take anxiety and convert it into routine. The Sentry can chase speed. You'll keep manufacturing certainty to match it. You don't notice it at first. It's subtle, like the way a room quiets when someone important walks in. Your name stops being just paint on a shop sign and starts behaving like an instruction. Send for one, they say, not a trunk. You, the promise inside the wood. You rearrange the workshop because growth needs lanes. Benches line up like well-drilled soldiers. Each stationed has its own climate, the glue corner warm and sweet, the sanding table dry and whispering, the hardware bench cool, metallic, meticulous. You move through them like a conductor, hearing errors before they happen. A hammer strikes slightly hollow. You turn, tap the joint yourself and the sound lifts to pitch. Better. Apprentices arrive with thin shoes and wide attention. You teach the ritual. Measure twice is a start. Measure until boredom forces accuracy is the truth. Grain runs like a mood. Follow it. Corners don't forgive. Plan for their grudges. Lids don't shut, they settle. If it needs force, it isn't finished. You assign them to patience, sanding long strokes until edges turn from almost to obvious. They learn that polish is just repetition with standards. The front room becomes a stage for quiet certainty. Sunlight hits the canvas and reads its pattern like sheet music. People slow outside the glass without meaning to. You place one wardrobe trunk open, one closed. The open one invites a hand to glide a drawer that refuses to stick. The closed one says, "Hear me," then gives the clean, exact click that makes shoulders drop half an inch. Relief, printed in brass. Orders shift from "can you make" to "we want your way." You codify sizes until porters memorize them by sight. Height A stacks over width B without thinking. Depth C glides into rail compartments like it belongs there. You lighten wherever dignity allows. Canvas that resists stains and respects fingers. Frames that keep straight faces through humidity's mood swings. The sign above the door doesn't brag. It simply refuses to apologize. You begin sending yourself in crates, templates, standards, written instructions fussy enough to embarrass a lawyer. In another quarter of the city, a second workshop hums to your rhythm. The first week, you visit and listen. Tools sound different in a room that hasn't learned your expectations. You stay late, fix benches that wobble, sharpen blades, swap a dozen small things no one but you would notice. Then the sound matches. The room relaxes. Work can begin. Clients evolve. Couriers once, then courtiers, then professionals who travel because the century demands it. Bankers with paperwork that must never wrinkle into accusation. Performers with costumes that must exit cases already breathing. Photographers with glass that hates surprises. You build for their itineraries. You hide a desk in a case and choreograph compartments for ink, wax, seals, stamps. Organisation moves from feature to philosophy. One evening you host a private viewing. Invitations quiet, guests louder. A conductor runs a finger along a seam as if testing a violin's neck. A dressmaker's assistant slides a drawer, then does it again because some satisfactions deserve repetition. A shipping clerk checks weights and nods like a man counting profit in saved backaches. You clear your throat and say very little. The trunks do most of the talking. There is envy, of course. Imitators arrive with flat lids and crooked intentions. They chase the silhouette and miss the discipline. You stop glancing sideways. Instead, you write your process like a prayer and enforce it like a recipe that took a childhood to learn. Glue ratios, curing time, humidity allowances, nail spacing like heartbeat intervals. You make consistency your flagship, then launch a fleet. A letter arrives from a distant port stamped in a hurry. The wardrobe case arrived in the rain, it says, and the dresses inside smelled like nothing at all. You pin that sentence to the wall next to specifications for a new corner plate. Utility earns poetry only when it's invisible. You promise invisibility, then deliver rectangles that keep secrets and schedules alike. At closing, you walk the room and rest a hand on each finished piece. It's not superstition. It's inventory by touch. The canvas is calm. The locks answer cleanly. The handles lie down as if they know when to help and when to vanish. Outside, wheels rattle over cobbles and fade. You turn the key in your door, and your name stays shining in the glass. The quiet announcement of a standard that refuses to tire. You start travelling to where your work is expected to appear before it does. Docks teach pace. Rail depots teach order. Hotels teach how chaos wears a uniform. You watch. You take notes. You redesign. On the quay, crates pile like arguments. You notice hands reaching for the wrong grip, so you design handles that tell the palm where to land. Flat when sleeping, confident when lifted, balanced so a one-handed grab doesn't tilt the world inside. On the platform, porters build towers with what they trust. You give them sizes that stack like polite sentences. No surprises, just the grammar of movement. In the hotel lobby, you see vanity tables improvising themselves across trunks and chairs. So you build the improvisation into the case. A mirror that folds out on a hinge that doesn't squeal, trays that rise in a single smooth gesture, a small felted alley where jewellery doesn't run away. You stitch loops for brushes and pouches for powders because haste misplaces and you prefer to outsmart haste. Factories want your order, but not your personality. You give them both anyway. Your order written down, your personality smuggled inside tolerances. You stamp invisible marks only your hands recognise. A hidden stitch count behind a liner, a particular bevel on a corner bracket, a radius on a handle cutout that makes thumbs forgive long days. If a part detaches, you can tell which bench missed a lesson. That's not paranoia, it's inheritance protection. You create a catalogue that refuses to shout, each drawing crisp, each description an answer to a problem unmentioned in public. For damp climates, one note says, and the treated canvas speaks the rest. For express travel, another declares, and the lighter frame finishes the sentence. Measurements appear in a logic people can memorise the way they memorise a friend's footsteps. The telephone joins your toolkit. You don't use it for fanfare, you use it for certainty. A call at 9 verifies a cabin's dimensions. A call at 10 adjusts a delivery to match a timetable that's shifted by 2 minutes. Those minutes add up to a reputation for punctuality that feels like politeness. In an age of haste, you offer consideration and make it look like magic. You begin shipping confidence internationally. Crates leave your rooms sounding like the first bar of a familiar song. No rattles, no indignities. Customs officers lift lids, find order, and close them again sooner than usual. Station masters learn your pattern and slot it into schedules without a frown. The world dislikes friction. You sand it down wherever your rectangles pass. You field special commissions because special circumstances expose weaknesses and therefore opportunities. A travelling library for a scholar whose books gossip when jostled. Straps like quiet librarians, dividers that prevent quarrels. A portable cellar for a gourmand who refuses to drink regret. Bottle cradles that keep corks sideways and temperatures temper-tamed. A specimen case for a naturalist chasing butterflies and storms. Pinboards under glass that don't tremble when weather sulks. Feedback becomes your second craft. You listen harder than you speak. A valet complains that a particular drawer swells in July. You widen a tolerance by a breath and test it in steam. A porter swears at a latch that bites. You reshape the edge and have him try again. He doesn't swear the second time. That's your applause. Rituals settle in. Each finished piece rests overnight before inspection because wood sometimes changes its mind in the dark. You test locks the next morning with cold fingers because owners won't always have warm ones. You scuff a corner on purpose to watch how brass accepts the insult. If it blushes into patina instead of peeling into shame, it passes. At a certain point, the map begins to feel smaller, not because the world shrank, but because your instructions grew. A trunk leaves Paris carrying a code you wrote, and joins a train in Milan that obeys dimensions you decided. In a London hotel, a drawer glides with the same unbothered confidence it had in your shop. Consistency becomes your export. Borders stamp it and wave it through. You aren't building objects anymore. You're building routes through other people's problems, and each time a porter lifts one of your cases without grunting, each time an owner opens a lid and doesn't sigh, each time a schedule breathes easier because your shapes make sense, you feel the world tilt a millimetre towards civility, and you push it again. Brand is an easy word to say and a difficult thing to earn. You don't laminate it. You prove it, one quiet delivery at a time, until strangers use your name as shorthand for a feeling they want to keep having. Patterns help, but not as decoration first, as recognition. You refine your canvas print until it reads at a distance without shouting at close range. It's a chorus, not a solo. The motif says origin. The construction says worth. The two together say, don't confuse me with cousins who share my face but not my bones. You decline fads politely. Materials audition. Some stay, some thank you and leave. You choose those that age like manners, better with use, more convincing with years. A new coating resists stains without turning glossy. An alloy and a hinge holds temper through a winter on deck and a summer in the baggage car. You test failure into familiarity so owners never have to meet it. You codify the voice of your house and teach it to others. Invoices that read clean, letters that answer everything and leave no one writing back to clarify. Repairs handled with humility, not blame. If it fails, it's yours until it behaves again. Your clerks learn to say the same sentence with the same calm certainty, whether a duchess calls or a courier does. We'll take care of it. Then they do. A journalist visits. He expects spectacle and finds routine. He writes about it anyway, because not tripping over self-importance is rare. He describes drawers that glide like good manners, and locks that prefer to be loyal rather than loud. The article travels, you don't frame it. You frame your standards, notice where apprentices can't miss them. Imitators will always exist. Some even learn. That's fine. You harden what can't be copied quickly. Discipline. You inspect like a gardener pulls weeds, daily without drama. You keep a defects shelf in the back where mistakes go to be studied, not shamed. Each one is labelled with the reason it happened and the method that prevents its sibling. Your shop speaks two languages, craftsmanship and accountability. Your son begins to speak them too. He sees markets before you do, angles you missed while loving the bench. You welcome his energy and hand him a ledger and a broom in the same hour. He learns orders at the counter and standards at the vise. He suggests a change in a pattern. You ask him to defend it with longevity, not novelty. He does. You nod. The house grows another backbone. You extend your promise to travel itself, not just to travellers. Shipping becomes more elegant under your insistence. Crates inside crates where necessary. Padding that doesn't shed. Ties that don't tangle. Instructions printed in a font that refuses arrogance. A porter somewhere will read them. Respect his time. He'll respect your work. Stories return like receipts for choices you made years ago. A diplomat's case crosses 3 borders under suspicious weather and arrives unbothered. A touring company finishes a season with costumes still breathing. A widow opens a writing box and finds letters arranged as she left them. A small mercy that feels like a large one. These aren't trophies, they're audits that you passed. You end most days the same way. Hand on a lid, listening for the punctuation you demand. That click. It's never background noise. It's a signature in sound. Apprentices learn to chase it. Clerks come to recognise it from the back room and smile without looking up. Customers hear it once and write your name into future plans without discussing it aloud. That's brand, habit, wearing your colours. By now, the world has stopped asking whether your rectangles matter. It plans around them. Train schedules assume stacking. Porters expect balance. Owners expect order. You fulfill the expectation not by getting louder, but by getting steadier. The flash belongs to others. You keep making the same argument, refined. Travel can be civilized, and we intend to keep civilizing it. Tomorrow, a new vehicle will demand a new compromise. You will listen, agree where it makes sense, refuse where it doesn't, and redesign in the margins until the margins become the main story. Tonight, the shop is dark. The street is quiet. Your name on the glass isn't boast or plea. It's simply a promise that learned how to keep itself. You notice the first copy on a grey morning when the boulevard smells like wet canvas and roasted chestnuts. From 10 paces it almost passes. Flat top, tidy corners, a lock that pretends it knows secrets. But then you lay a fingertip on the seam, and the truth speaks in a whisper. It drifts. A lid that needs coaxing is a confession. You close your hand and feel the old tug of irritation, smaller than anger, bigger than amusement. Congratulations! You've become a standard, because now people try to fake you. Counterfeits are weather. You cannot sue rain. You study it. You learn which clouds break, which winds repeat, which leaks say, fix the gutter, and which say, fix the roof. Imitators copy the silhouette because it's free. They cheapen the skeleton because it's hidden. They flatten the lid and forget the discipline that teaches wood to remember its line. They mimic the colour without marrying the fibre to the frame. They win at a glance. You win at the second try, the 5th journey, the 8th summer, so you turn identity from decoration into geometry. Out comes a pattern that speaks softly and far, repeating motifs aligned to the millimetre, never screaming, always certain. A background weave that refuses to fade into boredom. The print is not a mask, it is a map. Each flower, each interlock sits on coordinates chosen with the severity of a draftsman's square. You calibrate dyes to resist sun and salt. You adjust spacing so a single misaligned repeat betrays an imposter instantly. In a crowded station, a porter looks across a river of baggage and points with unhurried confidence, there. But pattern alone is an invitation to be traced. You answer with structure the eye can't steal, frames that triangulate pressure, corner blocks pinned through, not merely glued. Canvases coated to a thickness measured with feel rather than guesswork, thin enough to breathe, thick enough to shrug off a crate's insult. You institute a rule. Any joint that needs forced to close must go back to the bench until it apologises. You teach apprentices to hear truth. A right lid sounds like a period, not a comma. You make them practice with closed eyes, fingers reading grain like braille. The ledger joins the fight, not with threats, but with memory. Every lock code enters a quiet city of numbers. Every repair receives a history. Where, when, what, by whom. You can look at a trunk and say, bench 3, late autumn, the day the rain wouldn't stop, and then prove it with a note written in your clean hand. Imitators cannot counterfeit provenance without tripping over their own haste. Rivals escalate with ornament. Larger plates, theatrical studs, leather so glossy it reflects insecurity. You keep your restraint. You refine proportions until nothing calls attention to itself. Handles lie flat like calm decisions. Brass corners take bruises and turn them into patina instead of shame. Inside, trays lift without scraping, dividers kiss their slots, and a hidden seam runs so true it feels inevitable. Clients bring you stories as evidence. A wardrobe that crossed a sea twice without a single pull wavering. A desk case that kept letters crisp on a humid tour where paper wanted to curl like leaves. A jeweller who discovered that copies chime when shaken, and yours remain mute. You collect these as a carpenter collects shavings, proof of work, not trophies. And the monogram? It is not vanity. It is a promise printed in rhythm. Letters interlace because your methods do. Symbols repeat because your standards do. From across a platform, the pattern says origin. Up close, the construction says integrity. Years later, the wear says loyalty. That trio is your response to imitation. Recognizable, unhurried, and hard to fake without learning patience. Still, you do not build your house on defense alone. Innovation is the best lawsuit. You keep asking the only question that matters. Will it behave on the road? If a material sulks in damp, you let it go. If a hinge loses temper in salt air, you find an alloy that remembers its purpose. If a tray sticks in August, you plane a whisper off the rail and make July and January shake hands. While others chase your face, you evolve your bones. One evening, after a long day of politely saying no to shortcuts, you stand by the window and watch the boulevard's reflections ripple over a display trunk. The pattern holds steady in the glass. A passerby pauses. Their eyes soften at the click they can't hear from outside, as if their hands already know the sound. That's the outcome you defend. Not just the look, but the relief your work carries. Copies can sell surprise. You sell certainty. You learn that quality is not a speech, it's a checklist with a conscience. So, you codify what your hands already know, translating instinct into rules that travel better than you do. Glue ratios measured by weight, not hope. Clamping times that respect seasons. Longer in winter's damp, shorter when summer air turns glue impatient. Nail spacing set to a rhythm you could drum with 2 fingers on a bench. Tick, tick, tick. So stresses distribute like good news, evenly and to everyone who needs it. Supply becomes strategy. You choose wood by growth, not price. Slow-grown poplar for frames that don't warp when life does. Linens coated to a standard that refuses blotches and resists the tantrums of weather. Hardware cast from moulds you commission, with tolerances tight enough that screws sit flush without complaint. You reject lots that pass a casual glance and fail your thumb's press. Vendors learn your standards or learn to sell elsewhere. Inside your walls, inspection becomes culture. Each piece rests overnight because timber tells truths after dark. Morning comes, and cold hands test locks, because owners will sometimes arrive with winter still clinging to their fingers. Drawers run the length of their rails under fogged breath, not summer's flattery. A corner is scuffed on purpose to watch how brass handles insult. It should blush into grace, not peel into disgrace. Anything that hesitates returns to the bench without negotiation. Rivals love courts. You prefer corners. Litigation is slow theatre. Your craft is fast discipline. Still, you defend your pattern and your name when necessary, not to make noise, but to maintain clarity for customers who deserve not to be confused. Meanwhile, you deploy quieter weapons, internal markers stitched where only you know to look. A numbering system that places each trunk in a family with dates and benches for parents. die formulas that shift by a breath each era, so your eye can date a piece at 20 paces, and a practiced finger can confirm it in the next heartbeat. Training sharpens the edge more than any letter from a lawyer. Apprentices rotate stations like pilgrims visiting altars, cutting, fitting, lining, finishing. Each keeps a small notebook stained with glue and pride. Critique is immediate and unembarrassed. A seam that rises in the middle receives a calm finger and a quiet, again. A handle that bites gets redesigned on the spot. Leather thickness adjusted, stitch angle softened, brass edge eased until a porter's palm thanks you without words. The lesson repeats until it becomes reflex. You open your books to your team. Not prices, but reasons. Why this wood? Because it holds temper across climates a trunk will cross. Why this spacing? Because wood moves and you'd rather design forgiveness than ask for it later. Why this lock? Because privacy isn't a mood, it's a mechanism. You teach that every choice is downstream from travel, and travel is a prankster you respect enough to outwit with preparation. Customers sometimes ask for proofs. You give them demonstrations, not lectures. A sample corner is struck with a mallet to show how the bracket absorbs anger. A panel is splashed with brine, then wiped to reveal what salt leaves and what your coating refuses. A lock is chilled, then warmed, then asked to remember its manners. It does. You don't sell invincibility. You sell resilience calibrated to the realities of trains, ships, carts, and human impatience. And while others race to undercut, you race to outlast. It shows up on docks when the sun is mean, and trunks steam in their skins. It shows up in baggage cars when schedules shove, and stacks test all four corners at once. It shows up in hotel rooms at midnight, when tired hands want a drawer that glides without thinking. Your advantage hides in those moments, and adds up to a reputation described by small, repeated sighs of relief. You keep refining the monogram canvas, not louder, but smarter. A micro-texture added to the weave that fingers recognize before eyes do. A varnish in the finish that resists scuffs and deepens tone with time the way a violin darkens into its voice. Tiny tolerances refined so seams align through decades of opening and closing, humidity and rivals' envy. Counterfeits look tired quickly because time joins your side. Authenticity ages like a well-kept oath. Imitation ages like a bad habit. One afternoon, a client arrives carrying a copy bought on impulse in a port city. The lid drags, the lock brags and then sulks. You don't scold, you demonstrate, you set yours beside it. Open, close. That period at the end of the sentence again. The client listens to the difference the way people listen to their own names spoken correctly after too many mispronunciations. They nod. The copy leaves lighter. Your trunk leaves with a delivery address. No argument, only evidence. This is the quiet war you choose. Not noise, not banners, not monthly proclamations. 1,000 tiny decisions enforced daily until imitation exhausts itself against your routine. Standards are your soldiers. Patience is your general. And the road, still your judge, keeps writing you the same verdict. Permitted to proceed. You realize that authenticity isn't a logo. It's a relationship with time. So you design with tomorrow's fingerprints in mind. Leather grows warm in colour. Canvas softens at the hand, never at the corners. Brass forgets its shine and remembers its strength. Your pieces learn to look better, not after a week, but after a decade. Owners begin to treat scuffs as memoir, not mistakes. Feedback from distance keeps you honest. A touring company writes after a season of trains, ships, and backstage chaos. The wardrobe trunks came home with stories, not wounds. A diplomat sends a note in a tidy hand. Documents arrived with their dignity intact after border guards made their curiosity known. A mountaineer returns a small case after months of cold altitudes and hotter tempers at customs. The lock still clicks the same, even when fingers are clumsy with frost. You pin these notes on a wall near the bench where discipline lives. You also plan for what you can't predict. Travel changes the way a river does. New channels formed by pressure and stubbornness. Automobiles squeeze luggage into new geometries. Trains become faster, schedules less forgiving, baggage handlers more hurried because everyone is. You reduce weight without reducing backbone. Frames revise to borrow strength from shape. Liners that resist mildew like they learned manners in a less forgiving climate. handles whose hardware distributes force so the leather doesn't crack under a lazy lift. The monogram evolves into a passport. People spot it across a lobby and assume certain behaviours will follow: drawers that don't stick, locks that don't gossip, edges that don't fray into embarrassment. You ensure those assumptions survive every journey, and when counterfeits try to ride your reputation, your service separates cousins from kin. Codes retrieved from ledgers with courtesy and caution, repairs handled with humility. A case arrives bruised from a mishap you didn't cause, and leaves relieved because responsibility to you isn't a blame game, it's a standard extended. Inside, you keep building internal systems that outlive moods, a defect shelf where mistakes go to be studied, each flaw labelled with cause and cure, no shame, only prevention, weekly reviews where the bench tells on everyone equally, a culture that treats good enough as a polite insult. New hires learn that praise arrives in the sound of a closing lid, not in speeches. Veterans know that the most dangerous sentence is "no one will notice." You do not romanticize craft. You make it operate. Schedules exist. Deliveries meet trains with minutes to spare because minutes matter. Compliance with reality is your luxury. You can be elegant because you are prepared. When a drought slows glue curing, you adjust times. When a heatwave swells frames, you revise clearances. You treat unusual conditions as ordinary, because the road always supplies them. And then there's the most important test: time outside your supervision. Years pass. Owners move homes, countries, lives. Your work accumulates stamps and scratches. You meet it again in a stranger's hands, an estate sale, an attic cleared, a grandchild curious. You touch the lid and feel the old grammar still intact. The lock answers with the familiar punctuation. Drawers glide. The pattern carries its history without apology. That is the moment you design for, the reunion where function proves lineage. In a crowded, noisy century, imitation will always be cheaper, faster, louder. Let it. You choose longevity. You anchor your identity in what cannot be stolen quickly. Systems, training, materials disciplined by refusal to hurry. You teach your team that anyone can copy a face. Few can copy patience. The market learns the same lesson the hard way. You're content to let it. As evening folds the boulevard into amber, you take one more walk through the shop. A new wardrobe trunk waits near the door, straps neatly asleep, corners quiet, lock composed. You set your palm on the lid and listen for the sound that has guided you from a boy at a bench to a house with a name, that small exact click. The day exhales. Outside, a carriage rattles past, followed by the low cough of a motor car. Two eras overlap for a breath. Your rectangles belong to both because you built them for the only constant either respects: use. You stand on a quay where steam breathes like a dragon with a schedule. Ships groan, ropes creak, gulls argue over nothing, and your trunk's bored as if they've rehearsed for weeks. You've mastered the sea and the rail. Then a cough with propellers slices the sky. Not majestic, skeptical. An aeroplane stutters overhead like a sewing machine that escaped its factory. Everyone looks up. You do too. The world just shrank again. Travel keeps changing its verbs. Ships sway, trains stack, automobiles squeeze. Airplanes demand lightness, not polite, not optional. You lay a wardrobe trunk on the bench, the one that behaved on decks and in sleeper cars, and weigh it in your hands the way a tailor weighs cloth. Admirable on land, insubordinate in air. You begin subtracting, not charm, mass. You redraw frames with triangles tucked into corners, the kind geometry trusts. Ribs become braced lattices, each member earning its seat. Poplar stays, but slimmer, cross-banded where fatigue hides. Metal fittings go on a diet. Brass loses vanity ounces and keeps only backbone. You test, lift by one handle, tilt, drop a corner onto a rubber block, listen. The sound should be a polite thud, not a wounded protest. Automobiles had warned you already. Trunks must learn to live inside constrained rectangles, boot space grudging and uneven, rear seats with opinions. You answer with scaled-down companions that keep your grammar intact. A half wardrobe for weekends that still hangs a jacket like a promise. A compact writing case that unfolds into order on a hotel desk the size of a small apology. Vanity cases that stop bottles from arguing with glass. At the airfield, wind smells like oil and young courage. Mechanics wipe hands on rags that used to be shirts and squint at sky math. Pilots walk with a mix of calculation and superstition. You listen. Wait. Balance. Access. 3 commandments recited under propeller breath. You take notes until your pencil wants a break. Inside the workshop, you turn weight into a chess match. Canvas gets smarter. Same honesty. Thinner coating with a finish that refuses scuffs and welcomes hands. Linings learn to resist damp without feeling like slick compromises. You experiment with a honeycomb board, layered veneers separated by light and intention, then reject it until it answers to humidity with better manners. When it does, you let it in cautiously. You build a test, rig that imitates turbulence with no poetry at all. A case straps to a cradle and endures hours of shake, tilt, and persuasion from forces that don't care about reputation. Hinges must hold position at awkward angles without squeal. Latches must ignore vibration unless a thumb asks properly. You discover a bad habit in a particular clasp, the way it loosens when shaken sideways by impatience, and you redesign the tongue until it learns loyalty. Customers arrive with new itineraries and older expectations. A correspondent needs an underseat companion that holds ink, paper, a camera, a sweater, and 2 anxieties. You measure the narrow void between seat braces in a machine that treats space like gold and mould the footprint to slide and stop as if it belongs. The handle tucks. The corners round. Not fashion, physics. Skin that doesn't bruise upholstery. Edges that don't bruise shins. The lock learns to be sure in smaller footprints. Your code system shrinks without losing dignity. You grind plates thinner and harden them smarter. Springs whisper instead of boast. The click remains the same, a small verdict of certainty that makes shoulders drop. Ports used to be theatres. Airfields are workshops under sky. You deliver a set of flight cases to a journalist who chases front pages. He tests them with deadlines, which is to say, unkindly. 2 months later, a note arrives creased and satisfied. Everything reachable, nothing broken, security without shouting. You pin it beside a sketch of a new handle geometry. Oval, subtly biased toward fingertips in a climb. Automobiles keep muttering their own truths. You answer with trunk shape to wells, rounded corners that slide past spare tyres, a removable tray for tools and inevitabilities, straps that grip without chewing leather. A case for gloves and maps becomes a roadside desk when propped against a fender, because roads like to give you errands where you didn't plan them. Materials continue their quiet argument with time. You court an alloy that resists the salt in sea air, and the soot in train cars, and the sudden chill of altitude. It accepts your terms. Screws stop sulking when seasons change. Rivets keep their heads. You keep the pattern. Not louder, never louder. Recognition is not a shout. It's a nod across a crowded terminal. The motif stays steady so that frantic mornings don't need searching. You let the canvas age into its voice. Flight may demand youth in weight, but owners deserve pieces that grow wise. One evening you stand at the end of a runway while an aircraft lifts on its own certainty. Your case, the underseat one, is aboard, tucked where drafts can't reach it. You occupy a small square on the ground and feel a larger square in the sky behaving as designed. The rectangle that shaped carriages, trains and ships has learned a new verb. Float. Quietly, predictably, as if it always knew how. Air teaches you different manners than water or rail. On deck, lids want latches with leverage. In cars, handles want neutrality. In cabins, everything wants quiet. You start listening for sound you can remove. A rattle is just an unmade decision. You make decisions. You revisit hinges like a composer editing rests. The best hinge makes no announcement. It supports, aligns, endures. You alter leaf thickness by a hair, change the pin alloy to keep temper through cold bellyholds and warm hotel rooms. You chase the squeak to a tolerance barely visible and file it until it gives up. Inside cases destined for flight, you cushion in layers that act like good hosts. Firm first greeting, soft hospitality under it. A glass vial held by strap and nest no longer whispers panic when a baggage handler drops a box a bit too honestly. Jewellery trays receive an elastic courtesy. They yield a breath under shock and then remember their shape. You test with marbles and ink bottles because they tell the truth about motion. Access shifts from performance to economy. On a ship, time had the decency to stretch. In flight, minutes shrink. You design compartments that answer without hunting. A passport pocket that accepts clumsy fingers at 4 a.m, a document sleeve that reveals the right page first, a pen loop that doesn't forgive disappearing acts. You place a small, bright lining at the bottom of dark pockets, so lost things speak up. A tiny kindness, multiplied. The underseat case becomes a family, one aimed at correspondence and a book, another aimed at tools of influence, spectacles, a card case, a miniature inkwell that won't leak when altitude plays with pressure. A third for those who carry delicate ideas, film rolls that hate heat, sketches that hate creases, a little portfolio that opens like a stage and closes like a secret. Aviation throws a new insult, dryness. Leather has its moods, altitude exaggerates them. You adjust treatments to keep straps from cracking into complaint. You test in a room that steals moisture until wood wants to forget it was a tree. You make it remember, gently, with cross-banded veneers and adhesives that don't surrender when air gets thin. Security stays discreet. You do not arm your cases like safes, you make them stubborn to everyone except their owner. Plates shrink, tolerances tighten. The code ledger grows more precise, each number paired with an identity bound by proof that respects urgency without flirting with carelessness. A client can lose a key in one country and find the solution waiting at the next airport with their name spelled correctly and your caution intact. Automobiles lean closer, noisier, faster. You respond with trunks that bolt to racks without becoming prisoners. Quick clamps that bite cleanly and release without drama. Weatherproofing that earns the name, seams that turn rain into something that happens elsewhere. Fabrics that don't sulk when mud speaks. Inside, the same choreography. A place for wrenches that doesn't rattle, for gloves that don't flatten, for a coat that emerges not looking like it saw the wrong side of an adventure. You meet a pilot whose office is wind and vibration. He asks for a case that lives in the cockpit without getting in the way. You design a narrow satchel stiff enough to stand on its edge, soft enough to forgive a knee. The strap knows how to rest across a shoulder without cutting. The flap opens one-handed, cooperative but not flirtatious. After a season of weather and landings, he returns with a scuffed grin and a sentence you like more than applause. It behaves. Public spaces change. Terminals replace grand halls. The architecture is younger, glassier, patient. You let your pieces speak a dialect that fits. The look remains calm, no jarring shout of novelty. Function handles excitement. Form exudes composure. People hurry in these places. Your cases require no explanations. Open, close, lift, roll, stow. You consider wheels. Ships forgave dollies. Trains provided porters. Airports expect self-sufficiency, and concrete stretches far when the gate changes with mischief. You experiment with discreet rollers that appear when summoned and vanish when elegance resumes. Bearings that don't sing under weight. A handle that telescopes without wobble, like resolve. You test on polished floors and grudging carpets until both agree. The pattern remains navigation as much as identity. In rooms where announcements echo and clocks scold, recognition saves seconds, the kind travellers value more than compliments. The canvas grows a little smarter still, coating that resists the scrapes of benches and the embraces of conveyor belts. Corners learn a soft radius that disperses impact rather than collects it. Craft persists as your true advertisement. Apprentices still learn to sand until wood stops arguing. They still listen for the click because it still means what it always meant. Finished. Only now you teach another sound. The silence of a well-rolling wheel, the absence of squeak, the soft thump of a case finding its seat under a chair mid-flight and then forgetting to move. By night you set a prototype by the door and turn off the lamps. In darkness, floors speak louder. A lid that doesn't quite settle will confess in the quiet. A latch that pretends to be certain will betray itself. You fix what the night reveals. Morning brings light and travellers with schedules, and your work must not need the kind of forgiveness fatigue offers too easily. You didn't make the world smaller. You made it less troublesome to cross. Flight is audacious. Your job, as always, is to make audacity feel routine. Across all these engines and eras, you keep one promise the same. make movement behave. The vehicles evolve. The human constants don't. People still overpack hope and underpack patience. They still misplace what matters at the worst possible moment. They still want to arrive as themselves, not as a crumpled version edited by distance. You build with those truths held near. Consistency is not a slogan. It's a practice that survives weather and novelty. In the ledger, codes sleep in careful columns. On the bench, tolerances stay tight in summer as in winter. In shipping, crates protect not just objects but schedules. A porter in one city and a clerk in another can open, check and reseal without improvising. Reducing improvisation is kindness. You continue to pare away where weight doesn't earn its keep, and reinforce where fatigue pretends to be shy. A handle plate grows a backing washer made to spread load like generosity. A seam receives a hidden stitch that shares strain across an inch instead of asking a corner to be a martyr. These are not features for catalogue poetry. They are small decisions that keep tempers unprovoked at baggage claim. Elegance endures not because you chase fashion, but because you avoid apology. The canvas may learn a new finish. The frame may borrow a trick from Bridges. The lock may grow subtler teeth. But the rectangles still read as reason, proportions that soothe. Even when machines become more metal than fabric, your pieces look like they understand the human who will carry them. Feedback loops remain your favourite teachers. A violinist writes that a compartment hums at a particular vibration in the back of a speeding car. You add a velvet baffle, test again, and the hum disappears into dignity. A designer complains that a pocket resists a boarding pass when fingers are cold and clumsy. You widen an entrance by the width of a nail and tilt the geometry to invite rather than demand. The changes look minor, the consequences aren't. You guard service as fiercely as patterns. A key gone missing in a foreign city does not become a legend of inconvenience. It becomes a calm call, a verified identity, a code retrieved with caution, a courier arriving before panic finishes its sentence. Repairs arrive and leave without scolding. If a piece falters, you treat it as a lesson, not a scandal. Inside, defects still go to the shelf where they are studied until their siblings learn better. Imitators still haunt the edges, louder in crowded places where attention is cheap. Let them sprint. You write policies and processes, and you teach hands and eyes, things no one steals quickly. Your pattern is a map, yes, but your endurance is the landscape it marks. Years later, when a piece returns with corners honest and stories polite, you read your own handwriting in the way a tray still glides. Air travel, for all its noise, taught you a subtle truth. Quiet is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of certainty. A rolling case that doesn't sing. A latch that doesn't waver. A pocket that gives exactly what you asked for. In a terminal of announcements and newness, that quiet stands out. People recognize it even when they can't name it. They remember and return. One late afternoon, you watch 3 departures from a window. A ship easing from its berth. Like an old song, a train pulling away with clockwork in its bones and an aeroplane lifting with doubtless wings. In each, a rectangle you built rides along, stowed, stacked, slid under a seat. The distances differ, the demands don't. Weight, order, access, trust. You keep answering the same exam with better handwriting. You didn't set out to conquer elements. You set out to make them stop bullying what people care about. The road lies. Your corners tell the truth. The sea swells. Your trays stay polite. The air jolts. Your locks remember their owners and forget everyone else. The vehicle changes costume. Your promise doesn't. And when the day ends, as it always does, you return to the bench that taught you patience. You run a fingertip along a seam and ask the only question that matters, old as your first flat lid, new as the next departure board. Will it behave on the way there and the way back? The click answers. You exhale, turn the sign, and let the world keep shrinking. You'll keep making room. You return to the bench that taught you patience and set an old trunk beside a new one. Same silhouette, different century. You run your palm along the canvas. One surface tells stories in a deepened tone. The other waits its turn like an eager apprentice. You listen for the difference time makes. Both answer with the same quiet click. That sameness is not an accident. It's the point. You didn't build a fashion. You built a behaviour. The rectangle, humble, obedient, definitive, taught docks to stack, trains to breathe, cars to cooperate, and cabins to stop complaining. It taught owners to open, not rummage, to plan, not plead, to arrive as themselves, not as a wrinkled rumour of who they meant to be. That behaviour outlives vehicles, roads change accents, order does not. You walk past a wall of ledgers where codes sleep in columns straight as a metronome. Each number is an oath you made to someone who trusted you. That trust became the skeleton of your house. Locks are metal. Confidence is culture. You catalogue both. Apprentices, no longer boys and girls with thin shoes but designers with quick eyes, follow you between benches. You speak the old liturgy, updated with new nouns. Measure until boredom forces accuracy. Sand long, not hard. Designed for the road you do not control. If a drawer sticks in August, fix it in February. If a handle bites, it is wrong, even if it is beautiful. If a hinge sings, lower your file until it remembers silence. Materials introduce themselves, some with charm, some with substance. You ask each the same questions. How do you age? Who do you become after 5 winters and 3 ports that don't care about your feelings? Will you sulk in damp, brag in heat, or keep your manners under both? The keepers answer with patience. You welcome them. The rest leave without drama. A client arrives with a request that sounds like a thesis. A life that moves in 3-day increments across continents with 2 hours at home between. You design a ritual for velocity. Modular cases that nest like reasoning. Interiors that reset fast. Pockets that show you what you forgot before the door does. Not flashy. Clever. You make time behave where you can't make schedules kinder. Another arrives with the opposite problem. An archive that must travel as if it refuses to. Letters that have outlived their authors, fabrics that carry the smell of old rooms, photographs that dislike light. You build containers that feel like whispers, pH-balanced linings, dividers that don't bruise edges, closures that require intention, not force. You realise your rectangles are not just for departures, they are for safekeeping everything that can't be replaced. Across the showroom, a child presses a hand to the glass and traces the motif as if following a constellation. The pattern is a map to belonging. It tells a story the way a family name does. Short, specific, earned. The child doesn't know the dates. They know the feeling. That is how legacy spreads. Through recognition that bypasses explanation. You travel without moving. A trunk leaves for a film set where costumes need to step out ready for the lens. Another departs for a research vessel where Salt wants to pick fights with hardware and you already coach the screws not to answer. A small case rides under a seat with notebooks inside that might become a book someone will carry for years. Your work keeps leaving you to go do its work. That is the best kind of departure. You think of the boy on the road to Paris, the first close of a flat lid, the first time someone called your idea obvious after you laboured to make it look that way. Obvious is the medal good design receives when it does its job, so faithfully people forget it had to be invented. You accept the compliment every time. Evenings, you still look for the click. You still find it. And in that sound you hear not just closure, but invitation. The promise that tomorrow's roots can be made calmer, not by shouting at chaos, but by giving it no room to grow. You stand at a long table with a plan spread open. A grid of sizes, a family of forms, a set of proportions that behave together like well-rehearsed musicians. Harmony is not an aesthetic here. It's logistics turned into kindness. A porter in Tangier and a concierge in Tokyo can both lift, roll and store without thinking. The dimensions speak a language they already know. Efficiency. You standardise what must never surprise. Weight tolerances at the handle, the angle at which a case tips and chooses balance over drama. The distance a tray rises before it pauses to let a hand slip under with dignity. You leave room where fingers need room. You remove room where vibration looks for leverage. This is choreography for people who have somewhere to be. At the edges you keep room for joy, not frivolity, delight. A lining tone that feels like a secret sunrise. A mirror placed not to flatter, but to be useful in bad light. A small loop that keeps a favourite pen honest in a hurry. In travel, small mercies count double. You revisit wheels, not to chase trends, but to insist on silence. Bearings that tolerate grit. Axles that don't wobble into apologies after a year of airports that forgot the wax. You test on cobbles, smooth tile, grudging carpet, and one stubborn ramp behind a station that always reveals cheap pretenses. When a prototype hums instead of rattles, you nod once. Music to you is quiet. Security keeps its manners. Codes update with a more exact handwriting. The plate shrinks again without shrinking its promise. You add a sliding shield under the lock face, a small privacy that turns pick tools into disappointed tourists. Owners may never notice. You prefer it that way. The best part of trust is forgetting to worry. Sustainability is not a press release. It's a specification. You choose woods that grow back without sarcasm, adhesives that don't poison your apprentices, finishes that protect without staining the century. You repair what would be easier to replace. You keep a department whose entire job is mending, not as a revenue stream but as a statement of respect. For materials, for labour, for customers who remember when objects weren't disposable. Heritage could fossilise you. You refuse. Your pattern remains legible, your proportions loyal, and your standards stubborn, but you let the future in through hinges and handles. A new composite that resists denting without becoming aloof. A liner made from fibres recovered from oceans that deserve fewer apologies. A dye that deepens rather than fades when confronted by sun that doesn't keep its distance. You launch without fireworks, just a door opening at 10, a tray gliding at 11, a customer smiling at 12 because something that usually nags them didn't. Your marketing is service that answers before pride clears its throat. A repair done faster than expected, a code retrieved with courtesy and caution, a handle replaced before it asks. Word of mouth does the rest because calm is contagious. The culture inside your walls keeps its spine. A defects shelf still holds lessons. A weekly review still interrogates excuses. You celebrate the same thing you always have. The sound of a lid becoming a sentence that ends firmly. Apprentices graduate not when they can make one perfect corner, but when they stop making lazy ones. Your rectangles continue to travel. A conductor's baton rests in a velvet cutout that respects its authority. A chef's knives sleep in a drawer that won't jostle their temper. A designer's swatches sit in chromatic order because you decided chaos had enough advocates. A violinist's chin rest finds the same soft embrace in winter and in a hot theatre under lights that sweat. These are different lives, different days, same promise. One afternoon you host an open bench. Customers step behind the glass. They touch poplar ribs, trace brass corners, watch glue brushed like discipline. They hear the story you prefer, less legend, more process. A visitor picks up a finished case, lifts and blinks, lighter than their eyes expected, steadier than their wrist feared. They set it down and listen. No rattle. The most persuasive argument you make is that sound you eliminated. Even your archive is alive. You bring out a trunk that rode steamers before anyone believed in wings. The canvas has gone from statement to sentence to subtext. The lock still opens on its code. The drawers still remember their tracks. You stack it beneath a new case. They align as if born siblings instead of generations apart. That continuity is not nostalgia. It's an operational decision executed for decades. Dusk leans through the front windows. Outside, streets trade hooves for tyres, for quiet motors, for whatever comes next. Inside, you keep asking the question that got you here. Will it behave on the way there and back? Every answer you make is a sentence in the same language, translated for new vehicles, spoken with the same accent of restraint. Night gathers like a soft verdict. The shop breathes out the day, wood dust settling, metal cooling, canvas relaxing into its weave. You close the ledger where codes sleep and set your hand on a finished piece by the door. It will leave in the morning, enter a life you won't see, and keep a promise made long before either of you existed. Order, quietly delivered. You think about the distances your work has crossed, and the distances it dissolved. A Rivertown orphan walking to Paris with more resolve than shoes. A first flat lid that told railcars to calm down. Locks that replaced superstition with procedure. A pattern that taught crowds to recognise. Wheels that taught long terminals to feel shorter. 100 small inventions that add up to a simple truth. You civilised movement. Civilising is not scolding. It's hospitality. It's giving objects a proper place so people don't have to argue with them. It's telling time. We see you rushing and answering. Let us remove friction where we can. It's designing so well that fatigue forgets to be cruel. In the mirror of the closed window you catch a reflection. Less myth than maintenance. That's how you like it. You've made a life out of listening to complaints until they turn into specifications. It's heavy. You redesign mass into structure. It shifts. You teach balance. It scratches. You choose finishes that transform insult into patina. It loses its way. You make a pattern that's both a signature and a lighthouse. It opens to the wrong hands. You write numbers into brass and keep their memory safe. Each grievance becomes a hinge, a corner, a tray, a seam that behaves better next time. Across the world, your rectangles are doing their quiet work. In a small hotel room at 4 a.m, a journalist's underseat case opens to exactly what's needed. Passport, pen, proof. In a backstage hallway, a costume steps out of a wardrobe trunk as if it slept on air. In a cabin's low light, a violin emerges from a lined cradle tuned to kindness. On a kitchen table, a writing case becomes a desk, letters fanning like calm birds. These moments don't make headlines. They are what keep lives from snagging. You worry, yes, still, about the same things you always have. Drift, complacency, noise. Drift is handled by ritual. Complacency is handled by teaching. Noise is handled by ignoring it. You're not in the business of shouting louder than a crowded age. You're in the business of building objects that don't need to shout because they keep their promises in plain view. A courier arrives late with a bruised veteran. A trunk that lost a polite argument with an unfriendly conveyor. You place it on the bench, open your kit, and begin. The corner accepts a new bracket. The canvas accepts a careful patch. Colour match not to youth, but to dignified age. The lock still knows its owner. When you're finished, the piece looks like what it is. Something that has travelled honestly and will continue to do so. Repairs are not shame here. They are the proof that life happened and the promise that it can keep happening. You look at your team, the old hands who can hear an error across a room, the younger ones who can see an opportunity across a decade. You hand them both the same sentence. We make travel behave. It is simple enough to teach, strict enough to protect them from shortcuts, flexible enough to welcome inventions as long as they serve the sentence instead of trying to replace it. Customers will come tomorrow with stories in need of compartments. Some will ask for pieces that whisper in boardrooms. Some will need cases that laugh in rain. Some will arrive with inheritance to be respected by hinges that don't squeak. You will ask them questions until their anxieties turn into measurements. Then you will send them away lighter than they arrived, even if the scale disagrees. Outside, the city trades its clatter for a softer rhythm. You lock the door and the glass returns your name. It means more than you intended when you painted it. Not fame, but standard. Not signature, but grammar. A grammar other makers learned to speak because the world moved faster, and someone had to decide how objects would behave while it did. You walk the long way home. The night air tastes like tin and bakery sugar. A train sighs somewhere you can't see. A plane draws a thin thought across the sky. Somewhere inside both sits a rectangle, patient and prepared. Inside that rectangle a life is arranged. A shirt that won't sulk, a document that won't wander, a ring that won't learn the wrong story. You didn't make those lives. You made their movement kinder. At your door, you pause and realize the journey never really changed. It started as a road to Paris and became a road through time. The same feet, the same need. A way to keep what matters from being bruised by distance. You answer again, as you did then, with a flat certainty and a quiet click.